Yesterday, I get a call from a guy who was concerned that his best friend just found out he had stage 4 terminal cancer. The guy has a bar. He's the center part of the bar. He's the guy that everybody knows. They go to see him. He doesn't attend the bar anymore. He just hangs out there. Everybody knows him. They're his friends. What's going to happen to that bar when he's not the center part anymore? I don't know. And that's a big concern because he hasn't had a chance to transfer that goodwill to someone else. It's all within him. We're going to hope that he gets better, but we're going to plan as if this could be the end. And his wife says, well, you know, I have a different job, but I can start transitioning in and becoming maybe the new face to the business. And so these kind of practicalities, I don't think many people address.
Welcome to Planning Reimagined, a podcast from the planning experts at Robin Glenn and RX Investment Partners for wealthy families and successful business owners. When you start a business, you have a vision, a passion, and a plan for growth. But what about when you're ready to step away from that business? Whether you're selling it, transitioning it to the next generation, or just planning for an unexpected event. It's important to have an exit strategy just as crucial as it is to have a strong business plan. So today we're going to take a deep dive into what you need to do to properly prepare for an exit so that you can leave on your terms and secure your legacy. Hi, I'm Celeste Moya. Welcome to another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. Today we're continuing our series on business planning, and today we have a crucial topic, exit planning, which includes preparing your business for that exit along with securing a smooth transition. So whether you're years away from that exit or it's just around the corner, this conversation is for you. So I'm excited to have two experts with us today. Thank you both gentlemen so much for joining us. We have Isreal Miller, who is a partner with Lock Lord. And we have Oliver Cohn, who is a managing director at Bulkley Capital. So Oliver has been involved in a wide variety of transactions across many industries, helping families and business owners have those successful outcomes with their business transitions. And Isreal focuses on estate and tax planning in his practice, but he also has extensive experience in succession planning and business transition. So thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. So let's dive in. We're going to dive right into it. We have a lot to cover, so we'll jump right into the first question. So Isreal, let's start with just the basics of, exit planning. Can you share what is exit planning if you had to define it, and why should every business owner, regardless of their timeline, start thinking about it early?
I think the short answer is exit planning is what it sounds like. It's when someone is going to exit the business who has a major impact on the business. Maybe it's the founding member, maybe it is a manager who drives the strategy, maybe it's a key salesperson. Anything that can change the business because of their absence needs to be addressed early.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of business owners do. I can tell you, and I've said this on other podcasts, my dad is a business owner who should have an exit plan because his two children have no interest in his business. And to this day, even though I remind him about it all the time, it's not something that he's prioritized, right? And there has been situations in his business that would have merited having good exit planning strategy. So on that point, Oliver, in your experience in working with families and business owners, what are some of those risks that these businesses face when they don't have an exit plan in place?
Yeah, I think the risk is that unexpectedly, someone may decide this is the time they need to sell for personal reasons, for, someone approaches them. And there's many occasions where the owner's ready to sell, but the business isn't saleable, right? And part of, saleability and value business goes a lot beyond exit planning. But, I like to always think about framing this discussion as if you have a business that is attractive to buyers and is ready to sell for an exit, so you've planned for an exit, whether it's management succession, whether it's the strength and the predictability of the business itself, that's still a good business to own, right? It's good to be an investor or an owner in a business like that. And then you're positioned for the point that, something happens. You need to sell for health reasons, for family reasons, or you get the call from that big buyer that you've always been expecting to call you, and it finally arrives, and you want to make the most of that opportunity. So exit planning, I think, is not just about, positioning the company, making the most profits you can and getting the highest value. Is it ready to be handed over to someone else? And what's going to stand in the way of that, which is what Isreal's talking about, when you're a key player in the business.
Absolutely. We always tell business owners, you're going to exit whether you want to or not, one way or another, right? We have been working with a family lately where the father, who is in his late 80s, he had a very successful oil and gas business for a very long time, and he had no intention of selling the business. However, he developed terminal cancer, and all of a sudden now the business is on the market. And it's kind of like shark in the water, right? There's people out there who realize that his children were not going to take over this business, and now he had to do something quickly. And he ended up selling it maybe for not the value he could have gotten if there had been more of that plan in place. And it was saleable. It was a great business, but there's always going to be people that take advantage of opportunities. So It's also those unexpected events. We've seen the death of, business partners and different things like that. So in your experiences as you worked with family, and either of you can share, what's been the biggest difference, besides what we've already shared, of course, that you've seen between businesses that successfully navigate an exit and those that don't?
I'll start. I think that the key part of an estate plan is dealing with the assets. And for most people, the biggest asset they have is their home. So we deal with that. But for business owners, it's clearly their business. And one thing that people aren't identifying right away as part of the estate plan is they identify themselves as their business. When you introduce yourself to someone, you are whatever your job is. Or if you're a business owner, you are your job. You don't lead with, I'm a good person. Nobody knows what that means. But you say, I'm an attorney. No, I'm an estate planning attorney. I'm a tax attorney. And that's who you are. So when you're dealing with this planning, you're not just dealing with how do we transition this asset? How do we make sure that employees are taken care of? How do we make sure that our family gets the most value out of this? How do we make sure that we have a cash flow to replace the income stream that we had from the business? How do we deal with management? But also, who should be the next owner? Like you said, should it be family? Should my employees buy me out? Should it be some third party who has a completely different vision of what we've got? And because so many of these businesses are focused on the individual, it becomes sometimes very hard to transition because the goodwill is that person. And if that person's gone, there's just a handful of assets that may or may not have that much value. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I get a call from a guy who was concerned that his best friend just found out he had stage 4 terminal cancer. The guy has a bar, the friend who's sick. And he's the center part of the bar. He's the guy that everybody knows. They go to see him. He doesn't attend the bar anymore. He just hangs out there. Everybody knows him. They're his friends. What's going to happen to that bar when he's not the center part anymore? I don't know. And that's a big concern because he hasn't had a chance to transfer that goodwill to someone else. It's all within him. And so we're going to hope that he gets better, but we're going to plan as if this could be the end. And his wife says, well, I have a different job, but I can start transitioning in and becoming maybe the new face to the business. And so these kind of practicalities, I don't think many people address. When we're doing estate planning, we're really, for the most part, we're just like, well, how do I get that ownership to someone else? Easy enough. Here's a transfer document. When I pass away, the will says transfer 100% of the ownership to this other individual. But the ownership and the business are two different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And hope is not a plan, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I really like that concept of thinking about, the personality, the owner, what are they going to do? And I think when we think about exit planning from a transaction, someone's actually decided that they want to sell their business. You hear statistics about people being, seller's remorse after the deal, right? Like how many people regret the deal. And I don't know, there's no statistics around this, but I have a suspicion that a lot of that is not necessarily that they think 3 years later, I should have got $1 million more for that, or I should have structured that slightly different. I wish I'd got slightly higher interest rate on my seller note or something. It's usually because they don't like where they are anymore and what they're doing, and they didn't fully plan for transitioning out or staying in the business. And I like the idea of starting with the end in mind. I mean, the big secret, or not secret, the big key to success that we would say for exiting and getting through a transaction is to be proactive, to do it on your own terms, to do it when you're ready, and to be very transparent, very determined to get to the place that you want to get personally. So if that is, I want to leave and, move to the beach, we need to plan for that. We need to be able to point to the management succession in the business, that who will sit at the bar every day and welcome the customers if it's not you anymore. If you want to stick around, I mean, we've had clients that have been very deliberate about, I want to diversify my net worth. I want to take chips off the table. But there's still a lot to be done with this business, and there's opportunities to grow it. I'm not the person to invest anymore, so I need to bring in a partner. But I can play a role. I don't necessarily want to be sitting and coming in every day and worrying about HR and payroll, but I do think I can add some value building the business with a partner. And so we look for that kind of buyer. We look for a situation where, it's a buyer that's interested in that is aligned in terms of where the growth is, but then where the personalities are going to fit, right? So that they are going to enjoy. We can talk to them a year later, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm having a fantastic time. I'm doing just what I wanted to do. The company's growing. My people are now in greater positions of responsibility. Everyone's successful, and I'm working 20 hours a week, but it's really good 20 hours."
Yeah, and we know that, to your point of always having the end in mind, most of these entrepreneurs, it's not the end really, because usually they're taking that money, investing it into a different business. So being prepared to sell a business or to transition a business so you can go on to something else that maybe was your real passion to begin with.
Yeah, I have a friend at a wealth management firm here locally, and he says they think about it in terms of when they're planning for an exit, what are you retiring to, not what are you retiring from?
True.
And so really think about, how am I going to support what I want to do going forward.
Yeah, and it's to your point of it's their baby, and sometimes they feel remorse because they transitioned it maybe to the wrong type of buyer. We had a previous podcast guest that mentioned there's a study that business owners, when they talk about their business, it triggers the same part of their brain as talking about their children. So, I mean, it truly, really, in our body, we feel like it is our child because it's something you probably started from the bottom up. And in some cases, business owners put everything they had in the beginning of those businesses. So it really does mean a lot to them. So, I mean, in summary of all that, exit planning is crucial. Think about it from the beginning. You should be setting up your business to set it up for success for that exit long term, right?
I agree with what you're saying. What I see a lot is business owners are fearless.
And immortal too, by the way. Yeah.
But they know that they've got this great idea and they can do it better than anyone else. And they're going to go implement, and they don't think about compliance. They're not planning. They're just trying to make payroll and keep the business afloat. And 5 years in, they realize they've got this going concern. They've got a business. It's working. And then they finally decide it's time to start doing some compliance and seeing how they can maintain and protect this business so it can continue to grow. And I think that this should also be part of that strategy. You've got a business, it's worth something. What happens if you can't be here tomorrow?
It's an asset for sure. And they have a really hard time seeing themselves as that key person or such a key individual in the business many times. So we've talked a little bit about, exit planning. Now let's talk about, okay, so you've done maybe some planning. You're getting ready to sell your business. Oliver, this is your day-to-day, right? You're helping business owners sell, buy other businesses. So what can they do? What can a business owner do to prepare? What steps do they need to take to get the maximum amount of money for their business, not leave, money on the table?
Well, I think, we can talk like this. There's two parts to that. There's, being prepared for a process and making sure that process is successful, which to us is you're able to answer questions, you'll be able to provide data, you can point to the future, you can really support the excitement, building excitement in a buyer. The other side of that is to, understand what drives value to buyers, right? And position your company as best you can to fit that. And, no real secrets around that. I mean, if you think about it from a investor or buyer perspective, predictability, if you're underwriting a transaction, you're purchasing something, the more you can see in the future, that's how you're going to get paid, right? That's how you're going to generate your return, is the revenue of the business and the income of the business. So the more predictable that is, the more stable, the less concentrated. So, we get in. That's why in our world, in the kind of the M&A world, a software business where everyone's signed up for the next 3 years of monthly recurring revenue, it's pretty easy to value and to say, I'm going to pay quite a lot for that because I know this is coming. A construction business, right, where you're reinventing your income statement every year and your clients every year, is going to trade at a lower multiple. So those are kind of extreme ends of the spectrum, right? But there are lots of businesses where you can build recurring revenue that aren't software businesses, and I think a lot of people are moving that way to try and demonstrate the stability. And so you've got the stability in who your customers are, how long they've been with you, and then who your management team is what we've been talking about this morning. And so who's gonna run this business? You always hear the kind of joke about a business owner's role is to put himself out of a job over time, right? And so if you choose, you can continue to own a business and not have to worry about it every day, but participate in the distributions and the earnings of that business if you continue to own it. And that really is, a bit of a glib statement, but it's also true in terms of valuation of businesses. We've had a couple of businesses last year where we sold where the owner had already transitioned CEO roles to a non-owner, brought someone else in, so the owner was playing more of a chairman role. So it's much more convincing to third parties that I'm going to take most of my money off the table with this transaction, not necessarily going away, but you don't have to worry that all of a sudden I can go and buy all the toys I needed and never turn up at the office because actually we've got this successful CEO here who has a track record of 2 or 3 years of building the company at my side. So
many times we see where companies want that business owner or that key person, even if they plan on exiting, to stay for a few years, right? Because they're still, once again, an important part of the culture of the business. They might have some intellectual information that they need to stick around for. And so that's another thing that as business owners are transitioning, they may need to keep in mind, that you need to stick around. This isn't just, go fade into the sunset and go to the beach all day,
Exactly. I think as a buyer, there's such a imbalance of information about the company. The business owner who founded it knows everything about this company, whether it's written down or not.
Where the bodies are hidden, they say.
Right. And the buyer's coming in and he's given whatever it might be, 6-10 weeks to decide, do you want to buy this and how much, and then do some diligence. But if you were the buyer, there's some risk that you want to mitigate, which is why if you get into kind of financial buyers, private equity buyers, they love the idea of the seller leaving some ownership in the company. So, you're not going to leave ownership if you're selling kind of a dud business, right?
Yeah.
There's some issues there. So theoretically, you're aligned on that. And same with sticking around and helping smooth that transition for the employee base, the customers, the reputation, the brand out in the market.
I would add that during the process of actually starting from the letter of intent or even just starting to investigate the other company, there is a lot of the skeletons in the closet that become uncovered. And so the seller who thought they were selling the business for X suddenly becomes confronted with the reality that their business might be worth less because of any number of things. Things that I've seen that came up were they didn't know they had a sales tax liability in the state of Texas. They didn't even know what they did was subject to sales tax. They found out as part of the due diligence. And then how much is that potential exposure? No one knows. And as Oliver pointed out, you don't have much time to decide. We've had people who hired underdocumented guest workers, and that came out. How are they going to deal with the federal government? And get those wrapped up. I saw a situation in one of the deals we did previously where two couples both worked for the company. The husbands were illegal immigrants, and so the companies paid the wives both salaries. That's a big problem, and that has to be disclosed. And then the kinds of warranties and guarantees that are being made, or warranties and representations that are being made in the sales agreement, have to be adjusted, and that adjusts the price. And people often feel like as they're going through this process, the company that they were going to sell for this nice amount of money keeps getting ticked smaller and smaller. And to your point, it's great when at the end the owner wants to stay on, but I often see by the time the deal's done, the parties do not care for each other that much, and they're just glad to be done with it.
And that happens in family situations too, where we've
Yeah.
seen family members buying from another where they don't like each other very much at the end.
Absolutely.
So absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, as both sides are trying to negotiate the best price, it can often lead to hurt feelings.
And I've seen little things like they kept all of their accounting on an Excel spreadsheet that, nobody really knows where the past information is. So always keeping the house in order, essentially, is kind of what we're saying. Making sure things are buttoned up, the taxes are paid up.
Right.
All of that financial information is readily available because the investor has to know what risk am I taking on at the end of the day. So
Yeah, and simplistically, the lower the risk the buyer sees, the higher the price they'll pay.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think Israel's right. Like if you start at, theoretically, this is the value of this kind of business, the more risk I see, I start to lower that value. And those are, we'll probably talk about this, but that's the value of preparing. It's the value of bringing experts on your team, on your side, because the buyer's going to have experts that are going to find things in diligence. Diligence is a difficult period. A lot of questions. Owners are often unprepared for the level of detail that buyers are going to get into, and the question after question after question can be very draining. Which is why, before even going to market, to try and identify these things. If you really have no idea about something, then
Right.
fair enough. But oftentimes it's possible to investigate before you start talking to buyers. The more you can put on the table before going into diligence with potential buyers, they can't use it against you later, right?
Right, right.
If they've made an offer, you've agreed to a letter of intent, but they already know about the labor issues or the sales tax issues, then that presumably is baked in. Where it gets tricky is thinking we've got this deal and it keeps receding. You lose the relationship piece, as I was saying. Again, good to have someone in the middle to kind of be a buffer for that and try and find solutions for that. But much better not to even have that situation at all if you can, and really be very upfront about things.
And you talked about the value of business. So all business owners think their business is worth everything, right? So it's always worth more than probably it's valued at. And so they may have many times an unrealistic expectation of what they're going to get for it. So Isreal, from your perspective, what is the best way for them to actually get an accurate value of what they can go to market to and maximize it, of course?
Well, I think the best thing they can do is hire a deal broker. Somebody who's in the business, somebody who knows what the market is, someone who has connection with buyers and sellers. It's one thing to say my friend sold his business for this amount of money and I do the same thing. You don't.
Yeah.
There's so many different factors between the two businesses. You can't say that. Just like you can't say the person across the street sold their house for this and that's what my house is worth. It's a starting point. There's certainly some value in comparables, but then there's all the differences. And you have to be aware of what the differences are. And sometimes people don't know enough about their competition to know what the differences are. I think that attorneys are not good at this. We don't usually know. I can say the last time I did a deal like this, this was the multiple on EBITDA. But I'm usually not negotiating the deal. The best deal I worked on had no broker. And it started out of an estate planning project, actually. So we were talking to the client about his exit strategy. What are you going to do? My kids can't take over. They don't want to run it. My wife's not healthy. She doesn't know anything about the business anyway. I want to sell it to a junior partner. We realize in trying to go through the books, as Oliver was pointing out, I'm not saying cooking the books, I'm saying cleaning up the books, because having a clean set of books is vital. So they didn't have any trouble with their taxes, but they had been in business for 30 years on handshakes. There were no company agreements. There was nothing that said who was in charge, and our guy always assumed he was in charge. What we ended up doing through that deal was he already had his buyer in mind. His buyer was his biggest competitor. And they wanted to come into the Texas market, and he sold all of his markets to them for 15 times EBITDA, which was insane. And he held back just one market where he wanted to continue to be involved. But I think a lot of times when businesses are growing, they have creep, where they started out with what they were really good at, and then they thought, well, if I'm good at this, I'm probably good at a number of other things, and I'll just keep doing that. And I should offer this in another market, even if they're not really particularly situated for that other market. And so in this case, if you're going to be in the entire state of Texas, but you're headquartered in Dallas, it's hard to really service outlying communities, El Paso, Brownsville, Houston even. Mm-hmm. They're just completely different places. And so this individual, as part of his exit strategy, sold off all of the other markets except Dallas, and he was able to kind of focus on that and decide what he really wanted to do without ultimately exiting the business.
Yeah, that's a better strategy.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm sure you see this too, Oliver, and people looking at their business trying to find what's the right value.
Yeah, and honestly, when we are talking to a new client, we want to make sure we're on the same page in terms of value expectations. I mean, imagine a sale transaction, spending 6 months in the market, preparing, talking to buyers, very disruptive to the business, can be, taking a lot of time away from the owner. You're sharing information with third parties. Obviously, you've approved who those third parties are, but still, and there's some risk to that, risk to rumors going. The worst thing is to spend all that time and then discover, well, the market's valuing me at here, but I need to be here. We've wasted all this time and, effort. So we're on the front end, to Israel's point, I mean, we're seeing deals every day. We're talking to buyers every day. We understand the drivers of value in different businesses. We understand specifically how buyers look at companies and what they care about and what will drive value and what will take away from value. You never know the value of your business until you have the right buyer who wants to buy it and you kind of negotiate a deal. But I think we're fairly good at saying, our estimate is it's going to be somewhere in this range. If that range is only 50% of what you need to retire and to do what you want to do, then I don't think we should go to market. If that will work, then let's go forward, because hopefully we'll exceed our estimate, but we just want to be sure that, even that estimate is doable, which then ties into the whole estate planning, right? I mean, I think that's why we encourage on that front end, let's not go to market until you really understand and you've spoken to your tax advisors, your estate planning advisors, your attorney, because oftentimes people think, either my friend at the country club got 15 times for his business, so that's what I should get, or I need to have 100 million in my pocket to retire. And when they actually speak to their investment strategy kind of manager, advisor, their wealth advisor, they realize actually, with 40 million, I could do everything I want to do and still have a ton left over. And so that just changes the perspective, right? Takes some of the stress off the business owner that, if we get to where my advisors say we can get to, I'm going to be set and do everything that I want to do.
Yeah, and going to it with that realistic expectation is so important. We had a client, it was a funny story actually, where I think they offered him almost $100 million for his business, and his wife was part of the transaction. And I heard this as a after story, but the wife said, "How are we going to live off of that amount?" And because she lived a very nice lifestyle, so for her it wasn't the right amount, but that's what the business was worth, right? And so having that realistic expectation of what you're going to get. And so when you're at the negotiation table and you are trying to get that maximum value for your business, what are you doing to ensure that when you're representing a seller, that they are getting that fair value?
Well, there's a process. Our processes are designed to identify hopefully the best buyers, make sure that the client has options. So the best negotiating leverage, right, is to be able to say no to someone, and it's hard to say no if that's the only person you're talking to. So stories about, going to your closest competitor and only talking to them, can have a lot of risk. So that was very fortunate that one worked out that well. But, having options is the best way. So you're essentially playing potential buyers off each other and picking and choosing, the best terms around and saying, this is the deal I want. Like we talked before, having no surprises so that when you sign up for a deal, you can hold that deal and not tell everyone. I mean, what happens in an M&A transaction, by the way, is, you sign a letter of intent with a buyer. The key provisions of a letter of intent, which is essentially non-binding except for the fact that you agree to be exclusive with that buyer. And so you've got a 60-day, 90-day window where you're only talking to them. And of course, if you were talking to other people, you have to tell them, we can't talk anymore, we're talking to someone else. You risk them losing interest. If you come back to them in 60 days, you're not exactly in the strongest negotiating position there, because they assume something was found out that wasn't good. So you really need to make sure that, what you're agreeing to in the LOI is something you're willing to do, and hopefully that there's not going to be surprises after that during diligence. So it's, maintaining options right up until the point of signing an LOI, being prepared for diligence so there aren't surprises, and then paying attention to all the things that are beyond the price, right? I mean, we joke around about, you can name the price if I can name the terms, right? Because 100 million paid in cash is different than 100 million paid over 20 years.
Correct.
And so, think about, the payment terms, the payment timing, the conditions to closing, and then Isreal touched on it earlier, the continuing liability or kind of risk allocation when it comes to indemnifying the buyer for certain things that they may find out. How long is that going to be? How much are you on the hook for from a dollar standpoint? Which things concern you, which things are fine, and so it doesn't really matter. But there's, some things where there's a chance, and so you want to know kind of the outside bounds of
where are you willing to concede? Yeah, what are you willing to give up? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, we want to be sure that we're playing that role in the middle. We're preserving the relationship between the buyer and the seller during that diligence period, and we're able to be, along with the attorney working on the deal, we can be the ones being a little bit more forceful about getting something that we think is fair, and still preserving that relationship with someone who's going to have to work with each other going forward.
Yeah.
I think the great value that you guys add, in my experience, deals die multiple times before they finally get signed.
Yeah.
And so I usually cite the data room as the problem, but that's not the problem. It's just the due diligence process. And so as the buyer is constantly asking for more information, well, tell us about this. Oh, well, that's very interesting. Can you tell us about this? And can you document this? People just get so tired of the onslaught and the fact that at least one of their staff, maybe more than one of their staff, is completely tied up with chasing down documents and filling the data room. And so they say, you know what, I don't even care. I'm just walking away. I'll keep my own business. I like this business after all, and I don't want to deal with them anymore.
Yeah.
And when they're going through that, it's good to have someone who reminds them that this is painful, but on the other end, you will get paid, and this is worth doing. Or if it's not worth doing, tell them. But it's worth doing. You don't want to drop the deal now and have to do it all over again from scratch with someone else.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's so important for them to have the right advisors around them. Sometimes, we see this in all aspects of planning, where a client will say, I'm going to do it myself, and they think they're going to save themselves some money. But really, many times it's much more costly because it takes longer. They don't get the right deal. They don't get that maximum value. And they end up having to come back around and find advisors to help them anyway, right?
We sold a business a year and a half ago that we had been talking to the business owner for 4 or 5 years. And in that period, he tried to sell himself twice, went all the way to diligence, and the deal blew up. And it was partly, I think it was, wasn't fully prepared, didn't understand how the buyer would look at things like numbers and operating data. The buyer probably, honestly, found stuff out in diligence they didn't know and said, okay, well, we still like the business, but it changes our view on value. And it's very hard for the business owner who's kind of suspicious that, oh, were you playing this game all along? You were always going to change a deal on me. I've lost all trust in you. So, there's no way forward out of that ditch. And, our role is to get it out of the ditch if anything happens, remind the big picture. So when he came and hired us, right, we then, we were much better prepared on the front end from the financial standpoint, using a third-party firm to develop quality of earnings reports that would stand up with buyers, and having options. Who we sold to was not the group that he had been down the road with. It was another buyer. which ended up being a much better fit and that he, maybe didn't know about beforehand. So, identified different buyers, a better deal, a deal that got across the finish line.
Yep.
And Isreal's absolutely right. I mean, it's unbelievable. On the front end, every client kind of says, yeah, we're ready. We can answer anything about our business. And the level of detail, if you answer one question, there's 3 questions that come from that answer, right? And people, it's always, the CFO or the HR manager that are constantly having to go call brokers and get the insurance policies and find out what did we pay last year and the year before that, and document all of that, and it becomes very exhausting, very disruptive, very time consuming. So the more you're prepared on the front end, the better, again.
And in talking about advisors, Isreal, on your side, as you're overseeing, the legal side of things, what are so we've talked about somebody that can help broker the deal, move it along, negotiate. Obviously, we have the legal side. What other advisors are important for business owners to have as part of their, let's call it an exit team?
I think an estate planning attorney. Here's why. There is a tax planning strategy, which is to not have assets includable in your estate when you die, because there's currently an estate tax for assets that an individual owns over $13.61 million per person. And a lot of these deals can easily exceed that. And people don't think about that in terms of value when they're running a business. They don't focus on it the same way they would when it's cash. And so having that business transferred out of your estate before you sell it can mean that the difference in appreciation from the time it was valued and the time that it ultimately sells could save you a lot of estate tax. But you can't do that at the last minute. And so it's common that someone said, well, I've been talking to these folks, and now I was wondering if, since I've been talking to attorneys, I didn't want to talk to them otherwise, but since I have one on the line, I'm going to ask you about what my tax strategies are. Well, that also could have needed to be a couple years in advance, at least 6 months in advance. There can't be anything in place, or the IRS is going to disregard the planning. So I think an estate planner is important. CPAs are key. The CPA knows all the tax. They know all the books. No matter what a business owner thinks, most business owners aren't great with numbers, in my opinion. They need someone who runs the numbers for them. They're usually idea people. They're sales people. They're very rarely compliance people. And so their CPA can be so valuable during that process, and their rates are a lot cheaper than the attorneys. So as far as filling the data room and answering questions, I've seen CPAs carry the day. The broker obviously carries the day. Investment bankers. Not everybody can finance this thing. It's great if private equity wants to come in and buy you out and they have plenty of cash to throw around. That's great, but that's not true for everyone. And so who's going to help finance the deal can make or break a deal. And lastly, your employee. Whoever it is who's going to be helping with the due diligence and helping put this thing across the line. At first, it seems like an easy task, and they're like, oh, yes, this is easy. I'll just send, I have all these documents. But as Oliver was saying, the deeper they dig, it's exhausting. And once it's done, I can't tell you how many times I've seen in the final allocation of the purchase price, there's always a bonus for that employee who did all the heavy lifting, because the owner said, I didn't know what I was getting into when this started, and I didn't know what I was putting on this employee.
To your point of CPAs, the other day we were on a Zoom call with a family who's looking to transition their business to their children. And we were on the Zoom call and we were talking about lifetime exemptions and how much they've used. He's like, I don't know, but my CPA will know. And I'm like, okay, sure. So he literally picked up the phone. To the penny, the CPA told him exactly how much. Immediately, he just called him, pulled him up. He knew exactly how much of his lifetime exemption he had used. So a good CPA is going to be a very crucial asset in this part of the process.
If I may, I would also add that a wealth advisor, if the family has a trusted wealth advisor, or even if they don't, this is a time to consider one. I often tell people I'm not in the position generally to help someone find a wealth advisor, because usually when they come to me for estate planning, they're already successful and they have a wealth advisor. But this is one interesting situation where they've always invested in themselves. No one can get the kind of steady return on investment that they can from investing in their own business. And so to take that and then go into the market where now you're going to have a diversified portfolio or whatever alternative assets or whatever, having someone walk you through that and help you make that transition from I just got a check for my business to what do I do next, that's also crucial.
And what if some of your payout is in stock too?
Right, exactly.
So there's that planning part of it.
Yeah, and that kind of is kind of what I was mentioning earlier, that knowing what you're going to do and whether it's enough for all the plans you have is critical. I'd love to pick up on the team, the internal team part, because the external advisors, I agree absolutely. You need a full team. Every one of those people will pay for themselves when you get a successful deal done. If you're doing tax planning in advance, you're going to save a lot of taxes. If you're doing, if the CPA is helping get your numbers in order, it's just going to make the deal more smooth and get the deal done. The right attorney is going to help get the transaction done, and obviously people in our role managing the process, we believe we pay for ourselves multiple times over. And then the internal team is really important. I think that's an area where business owners are often very hesitant. You don't want to tell people what you're thinking of doing, and for fear that you're going to rock the boat. If there's uncertainty around, that rumors get spread that the company's for sale, who are the employees that are going to leave and find other roles? It's your best employees, right? The ones that have the options. But on the flip side, most business owners, don't have the time, don't have access to all the data that's going to be required to successfully manage a sale. So we need additional people involved. We need people who are going to help. And then not only that, back to where we started this conversation, one of the risks of a family business or a founder-owned business is the founder themselves being too important. Having a good team around you helps sell the business, right? The buyer sees them, is impressed by them, adds to the value of the business, adds to their excitement of doing the deal. So to us, I think of who needs to be in the tent. It's the people that are going to help us get through diligence and get the information on the front end that we need to share with buyers, and the people who are going to help sell this business by being who they are and holding the roles that they hold. And exactly what Isreal said, I think it's very appropriate, and usually our clients do it, is to put some form of retention plan in place or incentive plan in place with those key people. If you're still here and we sell the business, you're going to get X, or you're going to get X percent of the transaction. If, on the other way, you could say, if the buyer doesn't keep you, I'm going to pay you X, like as a severance payment. It's not quite as generous. It's nicer to be, I like the idea of incentivizing towards the transaction. And then, by the way, a lot of transactions that we do, what happens to the key management team is a big part of the decision process for the seller. Is this going to be a good place for them? Are they going to have ownership opportunity going forward? Are they, sometimes these bonuses that our sellers pay their management teams, a portion of that gets used to buy into the deal at closing. So they're now shareholders that they never were before, and now they've got some upside, which could be really meaningful to someone who's never had the chance at ownership before. And that's just, we need those people in the loop. We can manage, keep it confidential. Doesn't have to really go beyond 3 or 4 people typically. But that really is going to be a big way towards helping a deal happen.
What I see often too is there's business owners that don't see themselves as like this multi-million-dollar business owner. They're like, we're just a mom and pop shop. But they don't realize the type of organization they've created. Some of these blue-collar organizations, AC companies, plumbing companies. We're working with a family in Houston that they have this type of business. And I mean, it's $1 billion company, and they hadn't really realized the value of their business until all of a sudden they had to do some planning, right? So I think for our audience to understand, it doesn't really matter the type of business that you are. You really need to set up for that exit, for that success, have the right advisors around you, because you could be that you're leaving money on the table. So now let's transition a little bit and talk about when you're transitioning to family, because that gets interesting, right? Now you have family dynamics, you have children that maybe don't get along, sometimes there's spouses. And in Texas, I know we see this a lot, where there's cousins and brothers and sisters, and they're all part of the business, and one of them wants to be the president of the company. So Oliver, from what you've seen, like, what's the biggest difference if you've seen this, and maybe this is more of a question for Isreal too, but when there's a sale more so or a transition to a seller that's, a little less emotional versus family.
Yeah, and what I had in mind there is it's kind of a question that comes up a lot. Obviously, the biggest difference between selling to a third party and transferring to your heirs or your son or daughter is liquidity. Right? Yeah. Oftentimes, a third-party buyer can come and write you a big check. Oftentimes, your children cannot or don't want to. And so it's really about, so then what? Do we have enough? How do you manage the financial needs of the exiting shareholders? Are they going to remain shareholders so they can live off distributions? Are they going to remain employees and pull a salary? Are the kids going to buy them out gradually over time? So it's essentially concessions made, and most parents that are passing the business down, they want to pass it down and not handcuff the next generation by pulling so much money out of the business or putting so much debt on the business it's kind of hard to run it. But at the same time, they've got their own, estate planning, retirement planning to deal with, and their needs for income. Becomes a very tricky conversation just on the financial side, which I think is why a lot of people end up saying, well, we're just going to sell. I'm going to give you a portion of the proceeds and you do what you want to do with it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But, to keep it in the family, then it needs to be really carefully thought through. We've had a client for many years that very deliberately was going to pass the CEO role to the son. The father was going to pass it down to the son. And in preparation for that, the son, and to make sure the son was ready, was the right person, really wanted to do it, he spent many years moving around the company, learning all the departments, working his way up. They had a non-family CEO kind of there in the interim. So the father had transitioned to a chairman role, didn't want to be doing the day-to-day, but the son wasn't ready yet. So it was very deliberate. I mean, it was very successful in terms of going to bring in an outside CEO. His job is going to be A, to run the business, B, to get my son ready to run the business and kind of mentor him along the way. So that when they finally decided the time was right, he was ready to do it. And they really had, he had the skill set, he had the desire. Yeah. They had the time to do some planning, to think about how the kind of financial side would work, moving money out to the father for retirement. But if you just decide at the kitchen table on one Thanksgiving and that the son isn't ready or the daughter isn't ready, that's problematic. Right?
Well, that's part of the exit planning, right? It's also who is going to be my plan? Who is it going to transition to? Because so many times we see heirs that are not prepared and then something unexpected happens and it's faulty to the business. I saw a study recently that came out. We have all heard of the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. And what it shared was that study was somewhat faulty because it wasn't that those families weren't successful. It's just that they were transitioning their businesses out of the family many times. And so the wealth was leaving the family versus just keeping it in the family. And so that makes sense when there's heirs that are not prepared. So I'm sure you see this a lot.
Well, there's definitely a benefit from inheriting a company. And the benefit is when the individual dies, the basis is stepped up to fair market value. And so you can avoid a huge amount of capital gains. That is definitely a benefit. But without any planning, I think it's only a nominal benefit, because you may say for tax purposes, but how are you going to sell the business? Oftentimes, the owner was the best person to sell the business. They knew more about it. They knew more about its value. They knew how to make it run. They could hang around for a while and ensure the transition went smoothly. If they just pass away and leave the business to their kids who have maybe only tangentially involved, or even if they were more involved, they weren't involved in that role, the value of the business is going to decrease very rapidly.
Yeah, and that's a huge risk to the first generation, right? It seems great to keep it in the family. That could be from a emotional standpoint what we really want to do. And then your estate planner, your wealth advisor would say, okay, now you had something that was already a concentration risk. Now it's even maybe riskier if that isn't the right person to run it. What happens if something bad happens to the business and you've lost all of that value? So, yeah, it's a challenge. I was talking at another event recently and I think this is what you're getting at, founders have a certain personality, a certain role in the business. If you talk about kind of EOS, right, the kind of the visionary of the business, that's not necessarily the next generation's skill set. It might be, but you've got to fill those roles. And if you're exiting, is the next generation the right person for that role, or are they actually better suited to be, the person who actually gets the work done,
right.
The execution person, in which case what's happening, who's got the vision going forward.
And you mentioned estate planning, and we actually talk to our clients a lot about this and telling them there's so much more you can do before you sign that letter of intent to start thinking about how to preserve the asset of your estate for your legacy, right? So I know there's so many strategies, and we actually, our next podcast, we're going to delve a little bit deeper, but high level, like what are some of the things that business owners should be thinking of to protect their estate, some of those strategies they can use?
Insurance. For me, life insurance is crucial to estate planning.
Thank you. I love that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It's not a shame. It's true. Life insurance provides liquidity. If we want to buy the business out, there's cash to do that. Particularly if there's multiple owners, and some of the founders are going to stay on, and someone's going to have passed away. Buy-sell agreement in place is huge. Having liquidity to fund the buy-sell buy-sell agreement is even more important. Life insurance can provide liquidity to pay estate tax. If we haven't avoided the estate tax, at least we have some cash to pay it with. Life insurance can say if this whole business goes belly up because we didn't transition it well, at least there's income replacement for the surviving family members. Mm-hmm. And I had a situation last year where this woman's husband was one of these air conditioning professionals that you talked about. And air conditioning was hot. It may still be hot. Well,
no pun intended.
No pun intended. Because they have this stream of contracts. As you were pointing out, it's annuity. It's basically you're selling a stream of income. So every month or every quarter, someone's going to come out and check on the equipment and make sure it's still running. And with every one of those touches, you also have an opportunity to make repairs or upsell as it comes up. So you've got constant client contact. In this situation, her husband had gotten ill, and he had pulled out of the business, but he had a great reputation. His goodwill was out there. So he'd pulled out, but people knew who he was, and they still wanted his work. Well, they had a whole series of independent contractors. So she would take the calls, and she would route the work to independent contractors, and they would go perform the work under his name. And he passed away. And he was dead for 6 months, and she was still running this business. Wow. And she said, "Well, I need to sell because I don't want to do the business anymore." But what did she have to sell? She didn't have any assets. She didn't have any contracts because everything was just calling in. He wasn't there to maintain the goodwill. The buyer basically bought her client list, website, phone number, known clients, and said, "I will give you 15% for the first year off of any net income off anything I work on, and after that, for the next 3 years, I'll give you 10%." Well, that sounds like okay. That's okay. It's better than nothing. But then we had the problem of how do you enforce that? She couldn't afford with that questionable income to even audit to make sure she was getting paid everything she was supposed to. And she was quite frustrated at the end of the deal. And it would have been better if they had had some planning, knew what was going on, and had transitioned this long in advance.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we tell our clients all the time. Life insurance, it's just liquidity, right? It's just giving you options at the end of the day. And we've seen it on both sides. I had a client in Oklahoma. Her husband passed away very young. He had a heart attack. And she had to take over a business that she knew nothing about. CFO ended up leaving. COO ended up leaving. She had to sell her business for pennies on the dollar because she didn't have the liquidity. And we've seen it the other way, right? Where there is liquidity and now they have this life insurance. It gives them time. It buys them time to make a better choice or a better option. So absolutely. I mean, that's just kind of a contingency plan. So we talk about the transition of a sale, we talk about transition to a family member, there's also the unexpected. So
Sure.
there's death, there's, a disability. And to your point of the buy-sell funding, I can't tell you how many business owners I talk to in just a week. They're like, we have a buy-sell. And I'm like, is it funded? And they're like, what do you mean, is it funded? So it's all of those little things that people are just not thinking about. What other, besides, life insurance, buy-sell agreements, what are other some kind of, to wrap up our conversation, some key contingency things that need to be in place to protect a business from the unexpected?
Well, I think most people start their business maybe on LegalZoom, and they just form an LLC, and they say, I skipped out on all the attorneys because they're expensive, and they talk over my head anyway, and all I needed was this LLC. So they put an LLC together, and then they start their business. But that's not liability protection. If they don't have a company agreement in place, if they are living out of the assets and the bank account, so there's really no distinction between what is theirs and what belongs to the LLC, they've already gutted any liability protection they were going to get under the law. And so a lot of this stuff just is easily fixed with education. You can distribute the money out to yourself and put it in a separate account, and you've just taken care of that problem. But that's not available online for the quick consumer who just wants to set up the LLC and move on. And then just basic distinctions between what are protected assets in Texas and what aren't. There's a whole list of assets that people have protected from creditors that they don't know about, and then assets that they could get protected if they just did a little bit more planning.
And what is the right structure for the business?
Sure.
We see so many that they started small, they outgrew the LLC,
Right.
They should be a corporation, but they're not.
Right.
I'm sure you see that a lot.
Yeah, well, they're a C corporation,
Yeah.
so if they sell, they're going to get double taxation potentially, if they sell assets at least. And I was thinking when you were mentioning the buy-sell agreement, a lot of people may put that in on day one and then never look at it again.
Yes.
Oh, right.
And of course, circumstances change, and we've already talked about one issue of buy-sell agreement is great, but where's the liquidity to fund it if something happens? So that's where insurance comes in. But what if they purchased a $1 million life insurance, key man life insurance policy 20 years ago, and now the company's worth $50 million?
That happens a lot too.
And so there's no tracking of, how is this going to work? How are we valuing the company? There's a lot of loopholes or unspoken gray areas in buy-sell agreements sometimes that when you're having to actually look at it and it's the heirs looking at it or the widow or the widower, and then all of a sudden it becomes contentious because it's not very clear how you calculate value or what's included and not included. That's where, it just creates a lot of heartache and mistrust on that end. So being as clear as possible, updating it. We had a client recently that had a buy-sell agreement between two founders, and they were supposed to get a valuation done every year, and they hadn't done it since 2006 or something, right?
They're expensive, though.
Exactly. And, even if maybe you don't say we're going to have an outside party value, maybe you just agree we're always going to be okay with this formula, and then do that formula every year and work out, because, by the way, not only is it good for if you ever need it for the buy-sell, but how do you know if you're building value in your business if you're not measuring value every year? So it's pretty straightforward. Have an established way of valuing the company, valuing the shares of the company, not just the overall company, and do that every year and see whether you are actually building value for yourselves.
Back to the insurance point, not only do they never looked at that insurance policy again, how do we know the policy was even paid? Premiums, it's easy to move around. It's easy to lose track of where the policy was. Once the
it's a term policy and it already lapsed.
Right, there's that.
Yep.
There's they are no longer friends with that insurance agent, and so no one's ever followed up with them again. Maybe the policy isn't a good policy anymore, and maybe they've added new people. There's always as partners come and go, I don't think a lot of people are focused on who the insured are, and there's no point in insuring somebody who's not there anymore.
Right. Yeah, we see that a lot. Outdated policies that lapse, information that's outdated. We had a client that sometimes for different reasons we asked to review operating agreements, and it was a generational business, and I'm not lying, they showed us a handwritten operating agreement that great-grandfather had written a long time ago. They're like, we just abide by these same rules. And so I'm like, nobody took the time to even type it, so it was a very old agreement, to your point. I know that's like an extreme, but it happens that things are just outdated. There's partners that are gone, family members that are deceased that are not part of the business.
Yeah, I mean, we've had situations where, they've had multiple partners or owners in the past. One's been bought out 10 years ago, and there's no real record of that, right? And I understandably for the owners themselves, and that was no problem. We did it. It was all amicable. But when the buyer comes to the table, or if something happens and it gets put into an estate or something, and there's kind of a legal matter around it, that's not going to be good enough to just say, trust us, it was fine.
Yeah.
They're going to want to see, what did that person sign? Did they say that they were giving up? Because that could be a big risk to a buyer that, I just paid $50 million for this business, and then someone's going to come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I was owed $10 million of that $50 million. I never really was purchased or bought out, and now what?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I think another tax planning issue that comes up a lot is S corporations. People like S corporations because they can minimize employment tax that way, but it's so easy to blow the S election, and so while they're doing due diligence, there's 1,000 times that it's exposed that the S election was blown, and so what are the tax ramifications? And there you go, price is down again.
So just to kind of end wrapping up thoughts, if you had to leave our audience with one thought on exit planning to put you on the spot, what would be one thing that you would share, each of you would share with them, just kind of as a parting comment?
I think that it's a family decision. You identify as the business. Your family identifies as this business. This is what keeps everybody going. Make a decision. Sit down with your spouse. If your children are old enough to be a part of that, talk to them and see what everybody thinks should happen. Because communication is so important, and being on the same table. My father had a business, and he was a home builder. I am compliance oriented, but I'm not skilled in building things. My brother's very skilled in building things, but he's got no mind for business. He just does. And I wanted to do this business with my dad. That was my goal. Was I'd come out of law school, I'd head up all the legal and the accounting side. My brother and my dad would do all the work, and we'd have this happily ever after. And my dad said, I want to retire, and I don't want to do this. I just want to be out of the business. It's very stressful running your own business. And once I understood it, okay, well, he deserves to retire. I wasn't hurt that he didn't want to work with me. I understood why he wanted to do something else.
Yeah, and I would say, I'd echo that. One, be clear about what you want to do and communicate. So even when it comes to talking with buyers, communicate clearly what you want to get out of this transaction, so that you can structure something that works for you. And then from a piece I view as good estate planning that's updated, that an exit planning that you're thinking about as giving you peace of mind, right?
For sure.
Do it, know that it's done, know that there's no surprises for your heirs or your family members or your employees, and build a business that is transferable, that is ready to sell, even if like I said at the beginning, even if you're going to own it, that's a good business to own. It goes beyond the owner, just himself, his influence. It has continuity to it, has predictability to it. And then you're ready for when you want to exit, you're ready for an unexpected exit we talk about, and you can actually go and take vacation every once in a while, which a lot of business owners can't. Also key.
So you're going to exit one way or another, and hope is not a plan, once again, right? So exactly. Getting everything in order. Well, thank you both very much. This has been great. I know we can talk about it all day. I could ask you 100 more questions about this because it's such a crucial topic. There's so many business owners, and we just don't know what we don't know. We get going in our lane, what we know how to do, our areas of expertise, and there's so much more that goes into owning that business.
Absolutely.
So for you that would like to connect with our guests, we are going to include their information in our show notes. And we encourage all of you to review your exit plan. If you haven't started planning, please reach out to professionals like Isreal and Oliver so they can help guide you through what can be a very complex process. Please be sure to tune in to our next episode, in which we're going to be talking about how to maximize the value of your business, how to mitigate tax exposure, so more money in your pocket when that sale is right around the corner. You won't won't want to miss that one. If you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe, share our podcast. Don't forget to check out our show notes for other links and resources. And as always, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. See you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please be sure to follow on your favorite podcast player. To connect with us, you can email us at hello@robinglenn.com or schedule some time with us via the link in the show notes. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Hello Robin Glenn.